Lisa, a 16-year-old girl, often drifts off into her own world during class, her mind far away from the lesson. But today, her teacher suddenly calls on her, pulling her back into reality. She's forced to stand and face a challenging math equation far beyond her grade level. Her classmates, some snickering, others skeptical, watch her with doubt. Little do they know, the quiet, daydreaming girl standing at the board is about to reveal a hidden genius that will leave them all speechless. Lisa sat hunched over a worn-out kitchen table, the fluorescent light above flickering intermittently. Her pen moved furiously across the notebook, scribbling equations she could barely make sense of. The kitchen, cold and dim, smelled faintly of burnt coffee, the only reminder that her mother had tried, unsuccessfully, to brew a pot before disappearing into the bedroom hours ago. It wasn't much of a home, but it was all Lisa had. At 16, Lisa had long learned to navigate the chaos of her household. Her mother, once a bright spark full of dreams, was now consumed by her own battles. Alcohol, anxiety, and the harsh realities of life. Lisa often found herself alone, left to fend for herself, with only her schoolwork to cling to. But math, with its rules and patterns, was her escape, the one thing she could control. In this world of uncertainty, numbers were her refuge. Though she was a quiet presence at school, teachers rarely noticed her, dismissing her as another introverted girl who didn't fit the mold. They didn't know that Lisa had a mind that saw the world in equations, that her mind was sharper than anyone realized. But in this cold, empty house, no one could see it. No one except for her. Lisa's hands shook as she gripped the edge of her notebook, the ink from her pen smearing slightly as a tremor passed through her fingers. She paused for a moment, staring at the equation in front of her, but the numbers blurred. Her thoughts drifted, and the familiar ache in her chest returned. It wasn't just the cold that made her feel hollow. It was the weight of her life, pressing down from every side. From the bedroom, she could hear her mother's muffled voice, rising in anger, a harsh, unintelligible tirade. Lisa's shoulders stiffened, her heart skipping a beat. The fight wasn't new. It never was. She had grown used to the endless shouting, the slamming of doors, the tears that followed when her mother retreated into silence. Her father had left when she was 8, an absence so profound that she couldn't remember the last time she had felt truly seen by anyone. Every day, it seemed, she was a shadow in a house that never felt like home. Surviving, not living. The isolation weighed heavily on her, the silence so deafening it made her chest ache. In that moment, as her mother's voice grew louder, Lisa felt herself small, insignificant. But there was something else, a fire buried deep inside her. It was the only thing that kept her going. The door to the kitchen swung open with a violent crash. Lisa's mother, disheveled and red-faced, stormed into the room, her breath coming in sharp, uneven gasps. Lisa flinched, her heart hammering in her chest as the intense energy from her mother filled the space. "Lisa!" her mother snapped, her eyes wild. "What the hell are you doing? Daydreaming again?" Lisa instinctively recoiled, her shoulders hunched, but she didn't answer. She never did. There was no point. Her mother's words were like jagged knives, cutting through her silence every day. But today felt different. Her mother's anger was heavier, more suffocating. "I said, what are you doing here?" her mother demanded again, stepping closer, her voice rising in frustration. "Don't tell me you're wasting time on that stupid math again. You know what this family needs, don't you? Money. You need to get your head out of the clouds and focus on what really matters." Lisa clenched her jaw, feeling the sting of those words deep inside. The weight of the tension in the room pressed down on her, but her mind didn't wander. This wasn't just another fight. Her mother's words weren't just harsh. They were a challenge. A challenge Lisa wasn't sure she was ready to face, but one she had to rise to. Without a word, her mother tossed a crumpled sheet of paper onto the table, a math problem scrawled across it. "Solve this. If you're so smart, prove it." Lisa's breath caught in her throat. It wasn't just a math problem. It was a test, and Lisa couldn't back down now. The classroom was suffocatingly silent. Lisa sat in the back, feeling the weight of every eye on her as her teacher, Ms. Green, paced at the front, her voice sharp and condescending. She had been teaching here for years, and in all that time, Lisa was just another face in the crowd. An invisible girl with a quiet demeanor and a penchant for escaping into the world of numbers. "Lisa," Ms. Green's voice cut through the air, laced with mockery. "I trust you're familiar with the material today, but just to make sure, let's see if you're really up to the challenge." The students around her snickered, a few turning to whisper in hushed tones. Lisa felt the heat rise in her cheeks, the familiar sting of being underestimated. Ms. Green had always made a point of singling her out, constantly putting her under pressure with tasks that were far too difficult for anyone to complete in the time given. Tasks that no one else would dare question. She strode to the board and wrote a complex equation that had the class groaning. "I want you to solve this, Lisa. Right here, right now. Prove you're as clever as you like to think." Her words were a challenge, a gauntlet thrown at her feet. The entire room was watching, waiting for her to fail. But Lisa wasn't looking at the equation on the board. She was looking at Ms. Green's face. The thinly veiled contempt in her eyes told her everything. This wasn't about math. It was about humiliation. Her pulse raced, the pressure mounting. She had two choices: sink under the weight of her expectations or rise to the occasion, showing her that she wasn't just the quiet girl in the back of the room. She knew, in that moment, that if she didn't act, she would only push harder. Lisa's fingers tightened on her pencil, and for the first time that day, she exhaled, steadying herself. The tension in the room was thick, but the real battle had just begun. Lisa's mind raced as the equation on the board blurred into an incomprehensible mess of numbers and symbols. The whispers around her grew louder, filling her ears like static. She could feel the weight of their expectations pressing on her chest, the heat from Ms. Green's piercing stare burning into her back. The students in front of her exchanged sly glances, some already smirking, others clearly relieved that it wasn't them being called out. But all of them had underestimated her. Lisa's fingers twitched, her nails digging into the sides of the desk. The world around her seemed to shrink, her entire focus narrowing on the task at hand. Her breath was slow, deliberate. She couldn't let the panic get to her. As Ms. Green waited, arms crossed, a smug smile playing on her lips, Lisa did something unexpected. She raised her hand. The entire room went still. The murmur of whispers dropped into an uncomfortable silence, as if the air had been sucked out of the room. Ms. Green's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "You have an answer, Lisa?" Her voice was dripping with sarcasm. "Well then, let's hear it." Lisa took a deep breath, her fingers still clenched around the pencil. She stood up slowly, eyes locking on the board, blocking out the noise, the whispers, the judgment. Her mind was already racing ahead, calculating, decoding the problem with the ease of a well-practiced routine. The tension in the room was palpable as Lisa stepped forward, her hand reaching for the board. Ms. Green's face twisted in disbelief, as if she expected Lisa to falter any moment. But she didn't. With a quick sweep, she began to solve the equation, neatly, methodically, confidently. The numbers and variables, once an intimidating labyrinth, now felt like a puzzle she could finally solve. As her chalk scraped against the board, the silence deepened, the room frozen in anticipation. Lisa didn't look at anyone. She didn't need to. Her focus was unshakable now. The weight of their doubt, their mockery, melted away with each line she wrote. She wasn't just solving a math problem. She was proving something much bigger. Ms. Green's face shifted from smugness to a flicker of surprise, then to something else, something that could only be described as discomfort. Lisa's heart pounded in her chest, but her resolve had never been clearer. This was her moment, the moment when she would refuse to be overlooked, to be underestimated, and she wouldn't let it pass her by. Lisa finished the last step of the equation with a flourish, her heart racing in her chest. The silence hung in the air like a thick fog, and for a moment, she dared to think that maybe, just maybe, she had earned the respect she'd been craving for so long. The equation had been complex, but she had solved it quickly, efficiently. The room should have erupted in applause or admiration, but instead, it felt suffocating. She turned to face Ms. Green, waiting for her approval, but her expression was far from what Lisa had expected. Ms. Green stood still, her eyes narrowing as she stared at the board, then back at Lisa with a cold, calculating look. "You've solved it, but not the way I expected," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. A shiver of doubt crept up Lisa's spine, but she held her ground. "What do you mean?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Ms. Green stepped forward, her tone now laced with superiority. "You've missed something important, a detail, a crucial element that makes the entire solution wrong." Lisa blinked, her mind scrambling to keep up. What was she talking about? She had followed the process, every step clear in her mind, every calculation perfect. But now, Ms. Green's words were like daggers, sinking deep into the pride she had worked so hard to build. The class began to murmur, some students snickering, others shifting uncomfortably. "You didn't really solve it, did you, Lisa?" One of the girls in the front whispered, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. Lisa's breath caught in her throat. The words echoed in her mind, Did I miss something? Was I wrong? The self-doubt crept in like a poison, spreading quickly, consuming her thoughts. Ms. Green turned to the class, her smirk returning. See? Lisa, like always, is trying to prove something. But she can't. She doesn't have the depth to understand this problem. She looked at Lisa once more, her gaze full of quiet triumph. It's clear that you've never really understood math. Not on a deeper level. You're just going through the motions. Lisa's stomach twisted. The world around her seemed to blur as the cruel words wrapped around her like chains. The sudden realization hit her harder than any equation ever could. Maybe she was wrong. Maybe she wasn't as capable as she had believed. The whispers grew louder, the ridicule sharper. The weight of her own doubt became unbearable, pushing her to the edge of something she couldn't control. She wanted to retreat, to crawl back into the shadows where she felt safe, invisible. But for some reason, she couldn't. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides. She wanted to shout, to demand an explanation, to defend herself. But the words were stuck, caught in her throat. Maybe Ms. Green was right. Maybe she wasn't enough. As Lisa stood frozen, the weight of Ms. Green's words pressing down on her, she barely noticed the soft shuffle of footsteps approaching from behind. It wasn't until a voice, warm and steady, cut through the tension that she even registered anyone else in the room. Ms. Green, I think we've had enough for today. The voice belonged to Ms. Hargrove, the new math teacher who had recently taken over for Ms. Green's advanced classes. She was known for her calm demeanor, her quiet intelligence, and her unexpected kindness. Lisa had only been in her class for a few weeks, but already, Ms. Hargrove had earned the respect of the students by doing what no other teacher had done, listening. Ms. Green looked at her with a raised eyebrow, clearly annoyed. Excuse me? I'm handling my class just fine. Lisa needs to learn a lesson, and if you're going to interfere, I'm not here to disrupt your lesson. Ms. Hargrove interrupted smoothly, her tone unwavering. I'm here to make sure the students are treated fairly. And right now, this is crossing a line. There was a brief, tense pause. Ms. Green's face darkened, but Ms. Hargrove stood her ground, unflinching. Lisa. Ms. Hargrove's gaze softened as she turned toward her. Don't let anyone make you feel like your efforts aren't worth something. Lisa looked up at her, a flicker of something unfamiliar sparking inside her. A sense of relief, perhaps, or hope. She had been so consumed by the anger and mockery that had clouded her thoughts. But now, for the first time in what felt like forever, someone was standing up for her. Ms. Green might not see the whole picture, Ms. Hargrove continued, her voice gentle but firm. But I do. I see exactly what you're capable of. Lisa's throat tightened, the words almost too much to process. Someone saw her potential? Ms. Hargrove smiled, then turned to address the class. Let's give Lisa a chance to explain her solution. Maybe we'll all learn something new today. Lisa blinked, still caught in the whirlwind of emotions. Was she really being given another chance? To prove herself, not to Ms. Green but to everyone who doubted her? Take a breath, Lisa, Ms. Hargrove said quietly, offering her a soft smile. You've got this. For the first time in the longest while, Lisa felt something shift inside her. Not doubt but possibility. There was no shame in fighting back, in proving herself, and for the first time she wasn't alone in the fight. The days that followed the confrontation in class felt like a blur for Lisa, a mixture of uncertainty and quiet determination. But it wasn't until she found herself in Ms. Hargrove's classroom after school one Friday that something inside her truly started to shift. The room smelled faintly of chalk and coffee, the air thick with the lingering hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. The walls were lined with math posters and equations, but it was the small desk at the front of the room, where Lisa now sat, that felt like a world away from the cold, judgmental space of Ms. Green's class. Ms. Hargrove set down a stack of papers and leaned casually against her desk, a calm smile on her face. I'm glad you came, Lisa, she said, her voice warm but serious. This isn't about proving anyone wrong. This is about finding your voice and letting it show. Lisa shifted uncomfortably in her seat. She had come here reluctantly, unsure what exactly was expected of her. But the kindness in Ms. Hargrove's tone felt like an invitation she couldn't refuse. Do you remember the equation you solved the other day? Ms. Hargrove asked. The one Ms. Green dismissed? Lisa nodded, her stomach tightening at the memory. I remember. I want you to explain it to me, step by step, Ms. Hargrove said, crossing her arms in a way that wasn't intimidating, but simply encouraging. And this time, take your time. No rush. Lisa's hands trembled slightly as she pulled out her notebook and began to outline the solution. It felt different now, explaining it to Ms. Hargrove rather than Ms. Green, who had always made her feel small. The words came more easily, each explanation gaining clarity as she spoke them aloud. Ms. Hargrove didn't interrupt or correct her. She simply nodded, letting Lisa take the lead. Every now and then, she'd ask a probing question, pushing Lisa to think a little deeper, to dig a little further. "Why do you think this method works?" Ms. Hargrove asked after Lisa explained a particularly difficult step. Lisa hesitated, but the more she thought about it, the more confident she became. "Because it connects the numbers in a way that balances both sides," she explained slowly. "Like, it's about finding a way to make everything fit together, so it all makes sense." "Exactly," Ms. Hargrove said with a satisfied smile. "That's the essence of math. It's not just about memorizing steps. It's about understanding the logic, the why behind it." Lisa's chest swelled with something she hadn't felt in so long: pride. She wasn't just getting it. She was beginning to feel the power of it. Ms. Hargrove was right. This wasn't about beating anyone or proving anyone wrong. It was about her growth. They continued the session, going over more equations and methods, each one a little more complicated than the last. But Lisa found that she didn't mind the challenge. There was a clarity now, a focus that she hadn't had before. It wasn't just about solving problems. It was about understanding them. As the sun began to set outside, casting a golden hue across the classroom, Lisa felt something stir within her. An urge to keep going, to keep learning, to push past the doubts and fears that had once ruled her world. "Thank you," she said quietly as they wrapped up for the day. I didn't realize how much I'd been missing, just understanding why things work." Ms. Hargrove smiled softly, the lines around her eyes crinkling with warmth. "You're more than capable, Lisa. You just needed someone to help you see it." Lisa stood up slowly, the weight of her doubt lifting bit by bit with each passing session. As she left the classroom that evening, she walked a little taller, her steps a little surer. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time, she felt ready to face whatever came next, because she wasn't walking it alone anymore. The quiet hum of the classroom seemed distant as Lisa sat at her desk, staring at the complex equations laid out in front of her. It was the same worksheet she had struggled with just a week ago, the same set of problems that had made her second-guess every calculation, every step. But now, as her pen hovered over the paper, something felt different. She wasn't scared anymore. The math felt alive, not just a jumble of symbols and numbers. It had shape, form, purpose. Each equation was a puzzle waiting to be solved, not a mountain she could never climb. The fear that once gripped her in Ms. Green's class, the suffocating doubt that threatened to swallow her every time she faced a challenge, had loosened its hold. Lisa paused and glanced around the room, the weight of the moment catching her breath. A month ago, she had sat here invisible, dismissed. She had been the girl no one expected much from, the one whose questions were often brushed aside, whose answers were often met with ridicule. She had believed the narrative others had written for her, that she wasn't good enough, smart enough, that no one would care if she succeeded or failed. But now she knew better. The quiet support from Ms. Hargrove, the endless patience, the hours spent explaining things step by step, they had all built something inside her. Confidence wasn't a gift given overnight, but a muscle strengthened through effort and belief. She had been told, time and time again, that she wasn't cut out for greatness. But now, she understood something different. Greatness was never about being perfect. It was about persisting, growing, and learning from each challenge. Lisa's hand finally moved, drawing the first line of a solution. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers, and that, in itself, was enough. She remembered the first day she walked into Ms. Hargrove's classroom, full of uncertainty, holding back tears. Back then, it felt like the weight of the world was on her shoulders, but now, she felt a surge of power with every step, every problem she solved. For the first time, Lisa wasn't just surviving school. She was owning it. A quiet smile tugged at the corners of her mouth. "I can do this," she thought. "I am good enough." And with that realization, Lisa no longer felt like an outsider in her own life. Her potential wasn't something others would unlock. It was something she had the power to discover and nurture on her own. The path ahead was still filled with challenges, but she wasn't afraid anymore. The bell rang, snapping her out of her thoughts. Lisa stood up, gathered her things, and left the classroom with a new sense of purpose. She wasn't just walking out of the room. She was stepping into a new chapter, one where her voice, her talents, and her abilities mattered, and she was ready to let them be heard. Lisa stood at the edge of the school courtyard, her backpack slung over one shoulder, eyes fixed on the horizon as the sun dipped lower in the sky. The air was thick with the usual buzz of students, some laughing, others huddled in groups talking about weekend plans. But for Lisa, it all felt distant. as if the world had shifted just a little bit out of reach, pulling her toward something else. The decision had been building for days, each passing moment a quiet affirmation of the path she was about to choose. It was more than just solving equations. It was more than proving a teacher wrong. This was about her potential, her future, the chance to stand tall and claim what was rightfully hers. The math competition, an annual event that brought together the brightest minds from all over the city, had always seemed out of reach. Lisa had watched it from afar for years, wondering if someone like her, someone whose name had never been on a first-place plaque, whose intelligence had never been celebrated, could ever belong in such a place. But this year was different. This year, she was no longer going to stay in the background, cowering from the idea of failure. She had spent countless hours with Ms. Hargrove, not just on math problems, but on something far more important, belief. Her mentor had helped her see that the only real failure was not trying, not giving herself a chance to rise. But more than that, Ms. Hargrove had shown her that math wasn't a test of ability alone. It was a test of persistence. And Lisa was done being afraid of failing. She knew there would be doubts. Could she actually keep up with the others? What if she messed up in front of everyone? But she also knew that those doubts were just part of the process. They didn't define her. Taking a deep breath, Lisa pulled out her phone and opened the email from Ms. Hargrove. The math competition details were still there, right at the top, bold and waiting for her to make the decision. With a steady hand, Lisa hit reply and typed her answer. I'm in. It wasn't just a commitment to a competition. It was a commitment to herself, to the person she had become, to the girl who had once doubted everything she was capable of. No longer was she the quiet girl in the back of the room, unsure of her worth. She was someone who was going to take action, someone who was going to step into the spotlight, ready to show the world that she had a place in it. The next morning, as she walked into Ms. Hargrove's class, she held her head high, shoulders squared. There was no more hesitation, no more wondering if she could do it. She was ready. I'm in, she told Ms. Hargrove, her voice firm, unwavering. Ms. Hargrove's face softened into a proud smile. I knew you would be. The world hadn't changed, but Lisa had. And that, she realized, was all she needed. The room was silent except for the rhythmic scratch of Lisa's pencil against paper. The sun had long set, leaving the glow of her desk lamp as the only light. Outside, the distant hum of the city seemed to fade into the background as she buried herself in another set of complex equations, the numbers swirling in her mind like an endless loop. Ms. Hargrove had promised that the math competition wasn't just about memorizing formulas. It was about strategy. Lisa had spent the last few days learning to break down each problem methodically, not rushing through it, not giving in to the pressure of time. She understood now that the trick was to slow down and trust herself, to let the numbers speak. The clock on the wall ticked relentlessly, its sharp ticking almost mocking the silence. Lisa's hand moved swiftly across the page, solving each problem with precision, but something in her gut told her she wasn't there yet. Not enough. She still felt the weight of the looming challenge pressing on her chest, suffocating any illusion of readiness. She glanced at the clock. 11:45 p.m. A sudden knock on her door startled her. Her mother stood in the doorway, looking tired but concerned. Lisa, it's late. You've been studying for hours. Maybe you should take a break. Lisa didn't answer right away. Her mind was still tangled in the equations, racing against an invisible clock. She needed to do more, be better, not let any weakness show. She had promised herself she wouldn't give up. Not now. Her mother sighed, stepping into the room. Sweetheart, I know you want this, but don't burn yourself out. There's more to you than just this competition, you know? Lisa looked up, her eyes reflecting the exhaustion she felt but also the fire burning inside her. I know I've got to push myself. But if I don't do this, I don't know what's left for me. This competition, it's my chance to prove something, to show that I'm more than just, well, me. That I can do it. Not just for me, but for everyone who said I couldn't. Her mother studied her, as if weighing the words, and for a moment, Lisa saw the flicker of pride in her eyes. I get it, her mother finally said, her voice soft. But don't forget to take care of yourself along the way. Okay? Lisa nodded, but the fire in her chest had only grown brighter. I will. As her mother left the room, Lisa turned back to the worksheet, her focus unwavering. The next few hours were a blur of calculations, graphs, and endless notations. There were times when her hand began to cramp, when her eyelids grew heavy, but she pushed through it. Each formula, each problem was a small victory, a step closer to proving not just her worth, but her determination. In the following days, Lisa would rise early, her mind already reeling from the equations, and stay up late, breaking down every calculation until it became second nature. Ms. Hargrove's face would flash in her memory, encouraging her to stay focused, to trust in the process, to be strategic. "You're not just learning math," Ms. Hargrove had told her during one of their sessions. "You're learning how to think. That's the real prize." And with every session, every hour of studying, Lisa felt herself changing. She wasn't the girl who had been brushed aside in class. She wasn't the girl who feared failure. She was becoming someone else. Someone who had the grit and tenacity to face down her own doubts and push forward. She wasn't just preparing for a math competition. She was preparing to change the course of her own life. And as the day of the competition grew closer, the once distant goal began to feel more like something within her reach. She would face it, not with fear, but with the quiet confidence of someone who had worked tirelessly for this moment, and would stop at nothing to claim it. The air in the auditorium felt thick, almost suffocating. As Lisa sat at her desk, her hands trembling slightly, the auditorium was filled with the nervous chatter of students, their papers spread out in front of them like battlegrounds. Lisa's heart thudded in her chest, every beat a reminder of what was at stake. The competition had begun an hour ago, and she had breezed through the first few problems with confidence. The warm-up questions were simple, almost too easy. She could feel the rhythm, the familiar logic of each equation flowing through her, like second nature. But now, as she stared at the next problem on the paper, something was wrong. Her mind went blank. The problem in front of her seemed impossibly complex. A system of equations involving multiple variables, a problem she had trained for. She should have known how to tackle it. But the numbers, once so familiar, now felt like they were slipping through her fingers like water. She reread the question, her breath shallow, but the solution wouldn't come. The time ticked by relentlessly, seconds slipping away, mocking her inability to move forward. Panic began to creep in. She could feel the sweat gathering on the back of her neck, her pulse quickening. Every second that passed made her feel more exposed, more vulnerable. The others were solving their problems around her, their pencils moving with swift precision, while she sat frozen, staring at the paper. "Focus, Lisa, focus." She took a deep breath, but it did little to calm her racing thoughts. Her eyes darted to the clock, counting down the minutes. She had 20 minutes left. Only 20 minutes, and she still had half the problems left unanswered. Then, a voice echoed through her mind. Ms. Hargrove's voice, the voice that had told her that failure was part of the process, that not everything would come easily. But this wasn't just any failure. This was public failure. Everyone around her would see. What would they think of me? The thought stung, and she quickly pushed it aside, forcing herself to focus once more. But the anxiety wouldn't let go. Her hand began to shake as she tried to write down something. Anything, on the page, but the words were nonsensical. The numbers jumbled together, nothing like the clean solutions she had practiced so many times. She could feel the weight of the competition bearing down on her, the expectations from her mother, from Ms. Hargrove, from herself. Minutes dragged by like hours, and Lisa found herself staring at the paper, unable to make progress. The sound of pencils scratching across paper seemed to mock her, a constant reminder of the time slipping away. Finally, with a deep sigh, she put down her pencil, the failure settling heavy on her chest. The buzzer sounded, signaling the end of the round. The noise in the room seemed to amplify, the buzz of students handing in their papers, talking, laughing, while Lisa sat in silence, her heart sinking. She couldn't help but glance around at the others. They were all finished, their papers neatly stacked in front of them, while she had barely filled half the page. The weight of their success made her own failure feel even more pronounced. The moment the competition ended, Lisa walked out of the auditorium without speaking to anyone, her footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. She felt exposed, vulnerable, as though the entire room had witnessed her fall from grace. When she reached the empty courtyard outside, she sank onto a bench, her head in her hands. "I didn't do it. I failed." The words echoed in her mind, each one another reminder that she wasn't good enough. She had worked so hard, so relentlessly. And for what? To end up just like all the others, proving once again that no matter how much she tried, she wasn't cut out for it. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and she pulled it out absent-mindedly, expecting it to be her mother or Ms. Hargrove, asking how she had done. Instead, it was a text from Ms. Hargrove. "I know it feels tough right now, but remember, this is only one moment in your journey. Don't let it define you. You are stronger than this setback. And you are not alone." The words didn't immediately lift the heaviness in Lisa's chest, but they stayed with her, settling in the back of her mind like a quiet whisper of encouragement. Failure wasn't the end. It was just a part of the process, a test of her resilience. Lisa wiped her eyes, the sting of failure still sharp, but not as sharp as it had been just moments ago. She wasn't giving up. She couldn't. This wasn't the end of her story. It was just another beginning. Days passed after the competition, and Lisa couldn't escape the weight of her failure. Every time she passed the math classroom, every glance at her phone, a fresh wave of doubt would crash over her. What if I'm not meant for this? She wondered. What if I can't keep up with everyone else? But despite the heavy weight of self-doubt, she kept showing up. She kept pushing forward. Her routine didn't change, not really. Early mornings filled with problem sets, late nights with textbook pages that blurred together. But something was different now. Her resolve wasn't as fragile. She had her mentor's words to hold on to, that small spark of hope that had started to smolder inside her, despite everything. One evening, after yet another day of unrelenting practice, Lisa sat at her kitchen table, her head aching from hours of math problems. Her eyes were sore, the numbers on the page swimming before her. She was ready to throw in the towel. She was tired, drained from constantly battling the doubt that had crept into her mind. But then she remembered Miss Hargrove's voice. Every small step counts. Don't let the big picture overwhelm you. Lisa took a deep breath, lifting her pencil again. She glanced at a problem that had seemed impossible a few days ago. It was one of those difficult systems of equations she'd failed miserably at during the competition. The numbers seemed to taunt her, but this time, something inside her clicked. She approached the problem methodically, writing down each step like it was a puzzle she needed to solve. She double-checked each equation, carefully working through each part, remembering the techniques Miss Hargrove had shown her. Slowly, like a dim light flickering to life, the solution began to unfold before her eyes. With trembling hands, she finished the final step and stared at the completed solution. She had done it. Lisa let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The moment wasn't grand, no applause, no validation from anyone else, but for her, it was everything. A small victory, a reaffirmation that she could do it, even after all the setbacks. Her heart beat a little faster now, not from anxiety, but from the quiet thrill of accomplishment. She'd solved it. She'd done what everyone, including herself, thought was impossible. And it wasn't just about the math, it was about the fact that she had overcome herself. A quiet smile tugged at her lips, and she leaned back in her chair, letting herself bask in the fleeting moment of triumph. This was just one small step in a much larger journey. But it was enough to remind her of something important. She was capable. And with each small victory, she was inching closer to the person she wanted to become. Lisa glanced at the clock. It was getting late, but instead of feeling like the weight of the world was bearing down on her, she felt lighter, like the path ahead wasn't as long or as uncertain as it had seemed before. And for the first time in a long time, Lisa believed in her journey again. The day of the final math competition arrived, and the air was thick with tension. Lisa stood backstage, her palms clammy, her heart pounding in her chest. It was the moment that had been building for weeks, the culmination of all her hard work, all the long nights spent at her desk with Miss Hargrove's encouraging words in her mind. But today wasn't just about math. It was about proving she was more than the shy, underestimated girl who barely made it through the last challenge. The auditorium buzzed with anxious energy. Students, parents, and teachers filled the seats, the noise of their chatter drowning out Lisa's thoughts. She barely registered the murmurs of her classmates, the whispers about who was expected to win. The pressure of the event hung heavy in the air, suffocating. She could feel the eyes of her classmates on her as they filed into their places, their glances quick and calculating, their expressions unreadable. The familiar face of her rival, Vanessa, flashed in the crowd. Lisa's stomach dropped. Vanessa, who had excelled in every competition, whose math skills were sharp as a knife, who was always the first to raise her hand in class. The girl who had always been the gold standard. Lisa swallowed, forcing her breathing to stay steady. "You're not here to beat her," she reminded herself, eyes closing briefly. "You're here for you. You've got this. Focus on the problem in front of you." But the words of encouragement were a battle in her mind, a clash between self-doubt and the budding confidence she'd worked so hard to cultivate. The lights dimmed, and the crowd hushed. A projection screen flickered to life, displaying the first problem, a complex calculus problem that made even the best students shift in their seats. Lisa felt the heat rise in her cheeks as she glanced at the problem, knowing the real challenge lay in the minutes that followed. She had exactly 20 minutes to solve it. The timer on the wall started counting down. A cold rush of fear swept through her, her eyes darting to the equations on the screen. Think, breathe. Her pencil hovered over the paper. She couldn't waste time. This was the big one. She had practiced and studied for this moment, but the pressure felt suffocating. She glanced at her competitors. Vanessa was already scribbling furiously, her focus laser-sharp. The other students were lost in their own thoughts, working at a pace Lisa knew she couldn't match. Her mind flickered to the time she almost quit when she was stuck on a similar problem, the countless nights when she nearly gave in to the weight of failure. But she couldn't afford to back down now. She drew a deep breath and attacked the problem, piece by piece, breaking it down just like Ms. Hargrove taught her. But no matter how hard she worked, the clock seemed to mock her, ticking away seconds she couldn't afford to lose. Minutes passed, each one feeling like an eternity. Lisa's focus began to waver as doubt crept in. Is this even possible? Can I really do this? Just then, the whisper of Vanessa's voice cut through her thoughts, sharp and taunting, as if she knew exactly what Lisa was struggling with. Are you sure you're ready for this? This problem's impossible for someone like you. Lisa froze for a heartbeat. Her heart clenched, and her stomach dropped. It was the voice of every critic she'd ever faced, the whisper of all her insecurities laid bare. Vanessa had always been the epitome of perfection, and Lisa had always been the girl in the back of the room, afraid to speak up. But this time, something shifted inside Lisa. She wasn't the girl she used to be. She had come this far, fought for every inch of progress, and had already overcome more than she thought she could. The words that used to crush her now felt like fuel for her fire. With shaking hands but steady resolve, Lisa wiped away the doubt and forced herself to focus. I'm not backing down now. She dug in, faster this time, sharper, as her mind processed the equations with an urgency she hadn't known she had. The seconds seemed to slow, every movement deliberate, every number falling into place like a symphony of thought. She wasn't just solving a problem. She was rewriting her story, proving to herself that she wasn't the person anyone had pegged her as. The last seconds of the clock ticked down, and with a final, decisive flourish of her pencil, she wrote down her answer. She sat back in her chair, her pulse racing, sweat beading on her forehead. The room was silent, the only sound the soft hum of the timer. Lisa closed her eyes for a moment, trying to steady her breathing. She didn't know if she had one yet, but she knew this was her moment. The moment where she had fought against everything that had ever held her back and chosen to believe in herself. Now all that was left was to see if it was enough. The auditorium was eerily silent as Lisa sat back in her chair, hands clammy, heart thumping in her chest. The final seconds of the timer had ticked away, and now the air was thick with anticipation. She had solved the problem, or at least she hoped she had. The equations on her paper swirled in her mind, an endless loop of calculations and steps she had fought so hard to master. In front of her, Vanessa looked calm, her face a mask of composure as she handed her completed sheet to the proctor. Lisa's stomach churned. Vanessa was the embodiment of perfection, always prepared, always confident. And Lisa? She was still the quiet girl from the back of the room, the one who never expected to even come close to the top. But today things were different. The proctor began calling out the names of the students, one by one, as they handed in their work. The room buzzed with a low hum, as everyone waited for the results. Lisa forced herself to stay still, to breathe deeply, her pulse racing like a drumbeat. She couldn't remember the last time she'd felt this alive, this full of tension. When her name was called, Lisa stood up and walked to the front with steady feet, her mind blank but her heart filled with something fierce. She didn't know if she was going to win. Hell, she didn't even know if she'd solved the problem right. But it didn't matter anymore. As the proctor took her paper, Lisa's eyes flicked over to Ms. Hargrove, sitting in the front row. The woman gave her a small, encouraging nod, her face the picture of quiet confidence. Lisa didn't know if she was going to win the competition, but she knew she had already won something much bigger. The waiting was unbearable, every second stretching into eternity. The other competitors were already gathering in groups, talking in hushed voices, their faces a mixture of exhaustion and relief. Lisa's thoughts were spinning. Had I really done it? Then, finally, the proctor's voice rang out. The winner of the math challenge with a perfect score, Lisa Walker. Lisa froze. For a split second, she thought she had misheard. But then the entire room erupted in applause, and a wave of shock and disbelief swept over her. Her heart jumped in her chest, and for the first time, the world around her seemed to blur into the background. No, this can't be real. Her legs shook as she stepped forward to accept the trophy. The crowd's applause continued to wash over her, but all she could hear was the rush of blood in her ears. The girl who had never felt good enough. The girl who used to doubt everything she was capable of. She was standing here, a champion, surrounded by people who had never believed in her. Her eyes found Vanessa, who stood frozen at the back of the room, her face an unreadable mask. For a moment, their gazes locked, Vanessa's disbelief clear, but there was no malice in her eyes, just a quiet acknowledgement that maybe, just maybe, things weren't as they seemed. Lisa's fingers curled around the trophy, her grip tight, her body still trembling with the weight of what she had just accomplished. She glanced at Ms. Hargrove, who stood with a proud smile on her face. It wasn't just the math problem she had solved. It was everything that had led to this moment. The late-night study sessions, the doubts she had pushed through, the way she had learned to believe in herself, even when no one else did. As Lisa took her seat again, the applause still ringing in her ears, she felt a sudden rush of peace wash over her. The world had changed. She had changed. In that moment, she realized that winning the competition wasn't just about being the best at math. It was about claiming her place in the world, about proving to herself and everyone around her that she was more than the sum of her doubts and insecurities. She was capable, she was powerful, and nothing, not even the toughest problem, could take that away from her. The proctor moved on to the next round of announcements, but Lisa was lost in the quiet roar of her own triumph. She wasn't just the girl who solved a problem. She was the girl who overcame her own limitations and proved, in front of everyone who ever doubted her, that she was enough. And that, above all, was her true victory. The applause finally began to die down, but the sensation of triumph was still ringing in Lisa's ears. She stood there, trophy in hand, the weight of it feeling both real and surreal. The bright lights of the auditorium felt like they were closing in around her, but in the best way. It was as though the whole world had come to a standstill, all eyes focused on her. But Lisa no longer felt the old pang of insecurity that used to haunt her. She had done it. She had proved to everyone, most importantly to herself, that she was capable of so much more than she had ever believed. Ms. Hargrove stepped forward, her warm smile glowing with pride. "Lisa, you've earned this. You've earned every moment of this victory." Her voice, steady and full of belief, cut through the lingering shock in Lisa's chest. The mentor who had been there, guiding her every step of the way, who had believed in her before Lisa ever believed in herself. This wasn't just the end of a competition. It was the beginning of something far bigger. Lisa smiled, her lips trembling as she looked at the teacher who had changed everything for her. "I couldn't have done it without you." Ms. Hargrove's gaze softened. "I only showed you what you were already capable of. You were the one who took the leap." As the applause continued, the proctor called Lisa's name again, this time for a special announcement. "Lisa Walker, not only did you win first place, but we are proud to offer you a full scholarship to the prestigious University of Westbrook, where you will be able to pursue your dreams in mathematics." A collective gasp filled the room, and for a moment, the air felt impossibly thick. The full scholarship? Lisa had been dreaming of a future like this, of a life beyond the walls of her troubled home, beyond the limitations she had placed on herself. And now, standing there with the weight of the trophy in one hand and the promise of her future in the other, she realized that her life had just changed forever. The faces in the crowd blurred, but Lisa's focus narrowed. She saw her mom in the back row, her eyes wide, tears shimmering on her face. It was the first time in a long while that Lisa saw pride in her mother's eyes instead of disappointment. Lisa's heart swelled with something between joy and relief. It wasn't just the scholarship. It was the validation that everything she had worked for was worth it. The years of silence at the kitchen table, the nights of solving equations while the world around her seemed to fall apart, the moments where she questioned if any of it would ever pay off. All of it had led her to this. As the applause continued to fill the room, the proctor handed her the scholarship offer, and Lisa's fingers grazed the paper. It wasn't just an invitation to a better future. It was her moment to leave behind the uncertainty and pain of the past. This was her chance to finally break free. The reality of it hit her like a wave. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but it didn't matter anymore. Lisa had a plan, she had purpose, and she had the support of people who believed in her, truly believed in her. And for the first time, she believed in herself. The victory wasn't just the recognition, the scholarship, or even the applause. It was the knowledge that, in the face of everything, every setback, every doubt, she had fought for this. She had earned it. And as she looked out at the crowd, her chest full of a pride she hadn't known was possible, she realized one simple truth. This was just the beginning. As the ceremony came to a close, Lisa stood near the back of the auditorium, the weight of her victory still settling in her chest. Her mind was racing, but she felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to find Ms. Green standing behind her, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. For a moment, Lisa's heart skipped, unsure what to expect. But then, to her surprise, she spoke, her voice quieter than usual. "Lisa, she began, her gaze steady but not as dismissive as it once was. I may have been too quick to judge you, too eager to put you in a box. I see now that I was wrong. Lisa blinked, taken aback. This wasn't the Ms. Green she'd known, the one who'd mocked her every step. But in her eyes, there was something different. Something that spoke of regret, of recognition. You've grown beyond what I expected, she continued, her voice softening. And for what it's worth, you've earned every bit of that success. Lisa felt a wave of mixed emotions, vindication, yes, but also a quiet sense of resolution. Maybe even Ms. Green had learned something from her journey. Thank you, she said quietly, offering her a nod, acknowledging the unexpected respect between them. Later that evening, Lisa sat on the edge of her bed, the trophy resting beside her, a symbol of everything she had accomplished. The soft glow of the streetlights outside filtered through the window, casting long shadows across the room. Her mind drifted back to the beginning, the days when she had been unsure of herself, when every equation felt like an insurmountable mountain. She remembered the first time Ms. Green had sat beside her, patiently guiding her through the basics, her belief in Lisa unwavering even when Lisa had doubted herself. The hours spent at the kitchen table, the nights of feeling like she wasn't good enough, only to rise again and push forward. She thought about the countless times she had faced obstacles, both internal and external, and how each setback had felt like the end of the road. But somehow, each time, she had found the strength to stand back up. It wasn't just about the competition, the trophy, or the scholarship. It was about the person she had become. The quiet girl in the back of the room who had once doubted her place in the world had found her voice. She had learned that failure wasn't final, that growth wasn't a straight line. It was messy, it was hard, but it was worth every step. Lisa took a deep breath, looking at the trophy again. But this time, she didn't see it as a symbol of achievement alone. It was a reminder that no matter where she came from or what she had faced, she was worthy of every success to come. And this was only the beginning. Months passed after the competition, and Lisa's life began to take on a rhythm she hadn't imagined possible. Her scholarship to the University of Westbrook had opened doors she'd once thought closed forever, and her confidence had blossomed with each new challenge. But even as her future grew brighter, Lisa couldn't forget the past. The struggles, the uncertainty, the people who had been there for her when she needed them most. And now it was time to give back. One afternoon, after a long day of studying, Lisa walked into a local community center. It was the same place where she had spent countless afternoons after school, the same place where the volunteers had offered her refuge from the chaos of home life. Today, though, she wasn't a child looking for a mentor. She was the one walking in with the desire to make a difference. She approached the program coordinator, Ms. Collins, and smiled. I'd like to volunteer. I want to help other students who feel the way I used to, like they don't belong or that math isn't for them. Ms. Collins beamed. We'd love to have you. You've come such a long way, Lisa. You're the perfect person to inspire them. And just like that, Lisa became the mentor she had once longed for. She spent hours tutoring students, helping them with their math problems, and most importantly, reminding them that they were capable of more than they thought. She shared her own journey with them, how she had once struggled, how she had almost given up, but how, in the end, persistence had led her to a place of triumph. Lisa saw the spark in their eyes, the same spark that had ignited in her own heart all those months ago. She knew deep down that she wasn't just helping them with equations. She was helping them see their own potential, their own worth. As she left the center that day, a feeling of fulfillment washed over her. She was no longer the girl sitting at a kitchen table, doubting herself. She was the one lighting the path for others, showing them that with hard work and belief, anything was possible. In helping others, Lisa had found her true purpose. She wasn't just shaping her own future. She was shaping the futures of those who would come after her, just as Ms. Green had done for her. And in that moment, Lisa realized that she had come full circle. Years passed, and Lisa's life unfolded in ways she had once only dreamed of. She graduated from the University of Westbrook with honors, a leader in her field, her name synonymous with innovation and determination. But it wasn't just the accolades or the degrees that filled her heart with pride. It was the ripple effect she had created along the way. In her final year of college, Lisa founded a nonprofit dedicated to helping underprivileged students unlock their potential in STEM fields, with a special focus on mathematics. It was a tribute to the community center that had once been a refuge for her and a reflection of the mentorship that had shaped her life. Her nonprofit aimed not just to teach math but to change the way students saw themselves, to show them that they, too, were capable of great things. Through tutoring programs, scholarships, and outreach initiatives, Lisa was able to give back to the community that had supported her, just as Ms. Green had given her the tools to believe in her abilities. She wasn't just educating students. She was fostering confidence, empowering the next generation to rise above the challenges they faced, and to see education not as a hurdle, but as a gateway to the life they deserved. Her nonprofit grew exponentially, reaching thousands of students across the country. Lisa had become a sought-after speaker, sharing her story at conferences and workshops, inspiring young minds to believe in themselves, no matter where they came from. Her message was simple. Success is not reserved for the privileged. It's earned through resilience, hard work, and a belief that you are worthy of your dreams. As she looked out over one of her programs, watching a group of students working together on their math problems, Lisa couldn't help but smile. She had come full circle. The girl who once thought she wasn't good enough had now become the woman who showed others they were more than enough. And in that moment, Lisa understood the true power of her journey. It wasn't just about what she had achieved for herself. It was about what she had done for others. By helping them see their potential, she had built a legacy far greater than any trophy or scholarship could represent. Lisa had changed the world one student at a time, and in doing so, she had changed herself too.